When I watched Super Bowl 60, I couldn't help but think, man, the Chicago Bears could have beaten the Patriots if the Bears had been the team to come out of the NFC.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. On the show today, we're going to look at what Super Bowl 60 taught us that we can apply to the Chicago Bears in terms of where the Bears need to be better to be in the position that the Seahawks were in the Super Bowl, and how that might shape what Ryan Poles needs to do with his roster this offseason. Because the Bears have the coaching staff, and they have a lot of the talent they need, but they still are a few steps away from being quite as good and as effective as what the Seahawks were in the Super Bowl. So we'll take a look at largely the defense being the story of that Super Bowl for Seattle, and where the Bears still have a long way to go on defense to get up to that level, but specifically like what the Bears could do to try and emulate some of that, but offense as well. They taking care of business against Seattle or against New England and putting points on the board for Seattle. And it's worth a mention for special teams in there as well, being a subtly a big factor in that game for the now Super Bowl champion Seahawks. Before we do, I want to tell you today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The winter games are on, and there's no better way to follow them than with a bet on FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game. And thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. But when I watched Super Bowl 60, the big takeaway for me was mostly about the defense, right? Like, we'll talk about the offense and how well the Seahawks ran the ball, and Sam Darnold did a good job of keeping them in it and making the plays that he needed to. But how this Seahawks defense dominated the Patriots was the bigger story to me. And the thing that I feel like applies most when I think about the Chicago Bears and what they still need to do to get to the Super Bowl level. Because we've seen under Ben Johnson, this Bears offense was a top 10 offense this season and wasn't even particularly at its best just yet. But the defense has a long way to go. And the contrast between a Seahawks pass rush that was relentless and consistently harassing Drake May all game long, the contrast of that to where the Bears pass rush was down the stretch and the weaknesses that are going to come with that throughout that they need to be addressed this offseason is pretty stark. I think the encouraging thing there, if I'm the Bears, is that Seattle proved that super effective blitzing can be an absolute killer, right? That like it doesn't always have to be the 4-man rush. The 4-man rush absolutely was a key factor for Seattle, but they blitzed Drake May a lot. They were effective at getting home in those blitzes, and they never really quite had answers for it on the Patriots side, because the Seahawks could just sit back in those two deep shells and still blitz. So you take away the deep game, you get that pressure up on the quarterback, and he's just got nowhere to go with it. And Drake May did not do a very good job seeing the blitz and consistently responding to the blitz with quick, decisive throws. And there weren't always great options for him to have answers for that blitz. But man, we've seen the way, comparatively, there were times this season when Dennis Allen could get this Bears blitz really firing. And it wasn't like they were doing it as frequent and aggressive as what Seattle was doing in this game. But like, we've seen it be effective in terms of, we know the Bears have a defensive coordinator who can and is capable of scheming up blitzes like that create those free rushing matchups that it just seemed like the Patriots weren't passing it off and communicating it super well. It wasn't like they were sending 7-8 guys on cover 0 every time, but sometimes it was just, one guy cuts inside and it frees up an edge rusher off the outside. Like it was 5 or 6 man rushes where there'd be 5 or 6 blockers, but just they wouldn't be able to pass the blocks off properly to pick up the blitzer, and then finishing at Drake May and not missing those tackles on the quarterback is also obviously a big factor there. But then, of course, you got to give Seattle's 4-man rush some credit there too. DeMarcus Lawrence, Byron Murphy, Leonard Williams, Nwosu, the other edge rusher whose first name is hard to pronounce, Derek Hall, got in there and some action. Like, they have a good, strong pass rush, and they were getting sacks from a few different positions and a few different looks all throughout the game. So if I'm Chicago, I'm going this offseason saying, I got a ways to go on my defensive line, and that watching how critical that was for Seattle's defense should make it imperative that is really, I think, priority number one for the Bears defense this season is like this offseason is getting a better pass rush. And we'll talk about it throughout the offseason as a need here, but like it's a group that they have to find some ways to get more there. Despite having, Grady Jarrett pretty well locked in for this season on his contract. Dio Dangbo has a lot of guaranteed money on his contract, and he's injured. You got your main defensive line starters, Sweat, Jarrett, Dexter, and Odengbo are all back for next season, although Odengbo's injured, but under contract. Shamar Turner, Austin Booker, back for next season. The rest of your defensive line is going to be free agents. And to me, the answer is not just spend more money in free agency there, but that's part of the answer. I think about Seattle's defensive line. It's a combination of free agents, trades, and draft picks. They traded for Leonard Williams from the Giants, however many years ago that was now, 2023, or from the Jets, excuse me, from New York. Or was it the Giants or the Jets? Anyway, regardless, traded for the defensive tackle in the interior. Used a first-round pick on Byron Murphy. And then, DeMarcus Lawrence is a free agent signing this past offseason that was available to Chicago if they wanted him. I think time horizons, right? He's 32, 33. So I think Seattle was a little bit more willing to say, hey, veteran guy who's not going to be here for a long time, but we'll take advantage of what we can get from him for a short period of time. And then they had signed Nwosu from the Chargers a couple of seasons ago as a younger free agent and have been able to develop him a little bit over time in that scheme. And then they've got multiple second-round pick backups. Derek Hall was a second-round pick in 2023. Boye Mafe, one of their other edge rushers, second-round pick. Backup defensive tackle Riley Mills is a fifth-round pick. I think he got a sack in this game, if I'm not mistaken. They invested significantly in draft picks, couple of free agents, not the big splashy free agents, but just solid guys. Jaron Reed from the Packers, right on the interior. They just have put a lot of resources at that position and made it a priority for them over the course of multiple off seasons. So that's not to say the Bears can just make a trade here and a draft pick there, and boom, you've fixed your defensive line and you've got a Seattle Seahawks level pass rush. But boy, that was really the difference for them in the game. And when New England was slowing down the Seahawks, it was when they were getting a lot of pressure on Sam Darnold at times and when they were blitzing Sam Darnold at times. This was such a game of pass rush so often. And then, the running game and run defense is something we'll talk about in a second here. But because Seattle's defensive line was so good and so loaded up, they could hold Ramondre Stevenson to 23 yards on 7 carries and Travion Henderson to 19 yards on 6 carries. And maybe New England got away from the running game, abandoned it a little bit, but that was a priority for Seattle to stop the run and take away the deep ball. And they'll let you have some of the other stuff in the middle, and Drake May hit a few of those, but not consistently enough. Didn't get any points on the board until the fourth quarter. At that point, they got a 3-score lead. You're going to take the foot off the gas a little bit. The offense is going to find some ways to get something done. So I look at this as saying you can't go through this offseason saying, oh, well, Montez Sweat had 10 sacks and you're counting on development. You can't just say, oh, Javon Dexter's going to take another step next year, so he'll be better, and Dio Dangbo will get healthy and should develop, so he should be better, and Grady Jarrett can be healthier, so he might be better. You can't just go into this offseason or go into next season, just banking on the guys you have getting naturally better. That can be a factor and a part of this conversation, but that should all be extra in my mind. I want to build a defensive line that I trust is really strong, even if everybody on the defensive line gets 0% better than they were this season. Assume this is what you're getting from all of them and add to that to get to be as great as possible. And then whatever development they do on their own is a bonus, but I'm not counting on all of that to happen the way you hope it to. There's too many of those, if he gets better and if Austin Booker takes this next step and if Shamar Turner, I don't want ifs. I want, DeMarcus Lawrence has been a consistent, proven pass rusher throughout his NFL career and in Dallas before he came to Seattle. They knew what they were getting and they got it, right? And Byron Murphy, a first-round pick, that's someone that you are investing because you really have a lot of confidence that this is going to be a guy. Or you trade for Leonard Williams because, again, consistent, disruptive interior threat throughohout his career. Those are the guys that you want on, that you can just trust and count on, as opposed to, hey, we hope these young guys take that next step. All the young guys taking steps were extra for Seattle. You know what I mean? That's kind of the key, that I want it to be extra then for the Chicago Bears. I don't want, though, all of this defensive line emphasis to overlook how important the back end of the Seattle defense is too. And especially I think when we go into an offseason for the Bears where all of your safeties are free agents, I can't help but look at what works so well for Seattle and think that needs to be a significant priority for the Bears to be able to have a back end like that you can just take away everything downfield and make your pass rush's job a little bit easier too, and put your cornerbacks in better positions to succeed. So we'll take a look at what Seattle's really like the safeties, why that was so key to what they did on defense and how the Bears can try to emulate some of that next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The winter games are officially here, and if you're anything like us, you're locking in for the events that you only get to see on the biggest stage every 4 years. And that's why following the winter games on FanDuel just makes sense. From medal counts to individual events to finding your angle on the sports you care about most, FanDuel gives you more ways to stay connected to the action. The drama of curling matches that start slow and somehow get intense fast. The speed skating races decided by inches. And of course, hockey games that feel different right from the opening face-off. FanDuel keeps the entire Olympic experience engaging from start to finish. The winter games are on, and there's no better way to follow them than with FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game. The pass rush was, I think, the most visible part of how the Seahawks defense dominated the Patriots, and it was perhaps the most visible of the weaknesses on the Chicago Bears this past season. But I think a big secret to, I mean, it's not even a secret, but like the less visible factor in how good Seattle's defense is, and I think similarly, like the less visible factor in what the Bears were still able to accomplish on defense was on the very back end. And I think the Bears have the beginnings of their versions of kind of what Seattle has, but given the free agency and the potential turnover this offseason, I think this is going to be a really key position for Dennis Allen. I think Dennis Allen is going to have a more specific vision of the guys he wants in his secondary as opposed to the guys he inherited in his secondary. He didn't have a choice on Byard or Brisker when he got the job. They're under contract. The Bears weren't moving on from either one of them. Like, he had to make it work with those guys. And I think he certainly liked Byard and will try to bring Byard back. I'm less convinced about Jaquan Brisker. But, like, you know, he inherited Tyreek Stevenson and brought in Deshaun Wright, and inherited Jalen Johnson and Kyler Gordon. And I think Kyler Gordon, particularly, is a player we're going to talk a lot about here in a moment. But, like, he's got an opportunity to start to put some pieces in here that are a little bit more what Dennis Allen wants. And I think Dennis Allen wants to be able to do some similar things to what Seattle was doing on defense there. I think Seattle's probably a little bit more multiple and a little bit more aggressive in some other ways, but like the way the Seahawks defense largely works is like those two safeties sit deep. They try and take away the top off of everything, so you're not going to be able to get the deep shots. And then the four-man rush in front can pressure your quarterback so that he doesn't have all day to let stuff develop intermediate over the middle of the field. So make him throw short, wrap up a tackle, be aggressive, right? But one of the big keys there, I guess there's two big keys to the Seahawks defense, right? It's that you got Kobe Bryant and Julian Love can roam deep. I mean, Kobe Bryant is like a true, free safety center fielder type of guy. Love can plays in the box a little bit more, but also you can trust well on the back end. Like, they can be a Byard and Brisker type of combo there. But then one of the big keys to unlocking the Seahawks defense was Nick Manowari, the rookie. Call him a strong safety, call him a slot cornerback, whatever you want to call him. He was the do-it-all, jack-of-all-trades for this Seahawks defense. And he is a rare type of player. He's like 6'3", 220, right? Like, so this is not he's built more like a safety than a cornerback, but he can cover like a cornerback and tackle like a safety and stop the run like a safety. And the Bears aren't just going to pull a Nick Manowari, out of nowhere. But I can't help but feel like, well, Kyler Gordon is not built the same way as Nick Manowari. He doesn't have quite the same thickness, mass, size. I mean, there's 3 or 4 inches and, 20 or 30 pounds difference between those two guys. But I think Kyler Gordon has a skill set and a mentality that can be a Dennis Allen Bears version of a Manowari. Like, I think what makes a Manowari special that Kyler Gordon can't quite do is, like, Seattle could trust a Manowari to go one-on-one with tight ends like Colston Loveland and Travis Kelce and just say, hey, and the other team is trying to get a mismatch on your guy. This guy defeats the mismatch. It's not a mismatch. He's got the physicality, the strength, and the size to run with tight ends and not get bodied too physically. And I don't know that Kyler Gordon is quite that physical of a coverage player, but we spent a lot of time last offseason hearing from Dennis Allen and talking about this idea that Dennis Allen had big plans for Kyler Gordon, that this was a player that they were going to cross-train across different positions. Kyler Gordon was going to learn some safety, some free safety, some strong safety, some slot cornerback, even some outside cornerback. And it was someone who they felt confident playing at or felt like he had the ability to fill in at maybe any of the secondary positions. And that's where he can be a smaller Bears version of a Nick Emanowari, where he's just everywhere and can neutralize some of the threats. Because Kyler Gordon is a physical, aggressive blitzer on the slot. We've seen Emanowari do that as well. Well, is it strong safety in the box or in a true slot cornerback spot? Kyler Gordon is a physical, run-stopping cornerback who's not afraid to knife into the backfield, get dirty, take on a block, and tackle the running back. And even though he's, again, 30 pounds and 3 inches smaller than Emanowari, like, he has the physicality and the mentality, right? Like, he doesn't shy away from contact the way some cornerbacks might be more prone to do. He has that physicality. And we've seen Dennis Allen use these types of players in these types of hybrid roles before in the New Orleans Saints defenses of the past, that they've had guys like Tyrann Mathieu, who certainly not a size player, and some of these smaller safeties that are kind of slot corners, kind of strong safeties, but can also play free safety, and you can move them around. And like, there's no reason a healthy Kyler Gordon can't do that for this Bears defense in that same way. I mean, even C.J. Gardner-Johnson back in the days for the Saints before on the Bears, like, we just never got a chance to see Dennis Allen do that with Kyler Gordon this season because Gordon was hurt from the start and only played like 2 or 3 regular season games. Finally came back at the end or whatever, but like, it was just not, they never had an opportunity to really implement that in the defense. By the time he comes back, they just need him to lock down the slot because they've been so injured and they've got rotating guys at other spots. It's just like, okay, we just need to keep you in this stationary position. But if they can bring back a guy like Kevin Byard, get another safety that maybe, whether it's Brisker or somebody else that they can trust to kind of stay back and take the top off of offenses and not let them go anywhere deep. Have Gordon line up all over the front of your defense and move him around the slot and strong safety. Like, you can talk yourself into like having that kind of shell on the back end with this kind of aggressive all around safety corner physical player in the slot that's like a weapon for you. And that then gives your cornerbacks on the outside a lot more help if Dennis Allen wants to play that man coverage. And if you're going to blitz a little bit more, you can trust these guys to not give up big plays. And if they can keep the ball in the quarterback's hand for a little bit longer, then that 4-man rush can then start to get home. And so I think what the Bears are able to accomplish at the safety position as complementary pieces to how they're going to use Kyler Gordon, because there's going to be times when maybe they rotate Kyler Gordon to safety, and then can one of your other safeties, come up and play in the box and strong safety. Like, you don't just want 2 Eddie Jacksons back there, for lack of a better analogy there. But you do want some versatility there to be able to stay multiple and have a lot of different things. But I just think when you've got 2 guys that are going to lock it down deep, and then you've got a versatile weapon in the slot, that unlocks so much for your defense in terms of disguising coverages and making it all look different to the quarterback, even when it's going to be the same for the defense consistently. So like, once you address defensive line as like position that needs a lot of continual long-term investment in, like, safety's got to be something that you square away and just make sure there's no questions going into the season. There weren't really questions during this past season, and I think it was easy to take for granted when we're seeing the Bears cornerbacks get beat a lot. We weren't seeing the safeties get beat a ton. And of course, Byard has all the interceptions, and that was the more visible part. But even on the plays he's not targeted, you don't notice that, oh yeah, they took away those deep routes, and the Bears limited some big plays downfield. The big plays downfield were when it's one-on-one with a backup cornerback. It's Nick McLeod one-on-one downfield, where the safeties can't be there for everything. Sometimes you're going to have a single deep safety and the throw is going to be away from them. Like, that's going to be a reality that even the Seahawks defense, it deals with sometimes. But rarely was it like, oh, the safety was supposed to be there and he wasn't. They weren't perfect, but like, they were getting the job done. I want to see how Dennis Allen can take that to the next level and see sort of then the ripple effects across the rest of his defense. I realize there's been a lot of defense focus because that's where the Bears' weaknesses was, and that's where I think the Seahawks' real strength was in this game. I mean, they eventually got some more points on the board, but 7 of those points were a pick 6 by Nwosu on the front of the defensive line there. It was kind of a fumble, but he caught it in the air, so they call it an interception. But I mean, they kicked, 5 field goals in the game. It was not a masterclass Seahawks offensive performance, but I did think it was a valuable one for the Bears to look at and say, hey, I think we're on the right track there. I think to me, this game was about offensively how well Seattle consistently ran the ball and controlled the clock, and then the difference making in terms of how well the two quarterbacks took care of the ball. So I think there's some ways we can apply this to where the Chicago Bears offense is right now. Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by Indeed. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but didn't turn out to be the right fit, you know exactly how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites, because Indeed's sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed are 90% more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs. So spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. That's Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL, and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Do it the right way with Indeed. Thank you for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen of the day. If you are one of those guys who tunes in every single day, 5 days a week, we really appreciate you. You are the true rock stars. But whether it's once a day or five times, or once a week or 5 times a week, we really appreciate you making us a part of your listening habit. If you want to take your listening to the next level, you can check out the Locked On Everydayers Club. If you want an ad-free audio feed of Locked On Bears, whether it's compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, any of the podcasting apps, you can check it out at the website is lockedonbears.supercast.com. It'll also give you access to an exclusive Locked On Bears group chat in the Locked On Everydayers Club Discord, only for listeners of this show in the Everydayers Club. You can find the link in the show notes of the description for the podcast, wherever you're listening or watching along on the YouTube channel. But as we turn to the Bears offense and the lessons from this Super Bowl, right? Like, to me, it wasn't like Sam Darnold had some amazing game, but he took care of the football, got the ball into the hands of his playmakers, and turned and handed it off 27 times for 135 yards on the ground with Kenneth Walker. And I think he handed it off a couple other times to the other backs, but like they were able to sit and lean in this running game and not necessarily ask their quarterback to be Superman. He made some plays when they needed them to, but it was not about his arm carrying them to victory. It was like, no, we got a good running game and a good solid running back who is creating yards. And even when the Patriots are loading up the box to try and stop him, he'd find a way to Chris Collinsworth talked about his patience over and over and over again. And eventually, kind of knifing through. And like, that should be the formula for the Bears offense. That was supposed to be the formula for the Bears offense this season. They didn't quite execute it that well to where we'd get to the fourth quarter, see that they're down by 17, and then running game goes out the window. Caleb Williams has to be the hero, and he was, and he could be. And that's a luxury, but you don't want to have to count on that the way the Bears did this season. Ideally, you'd like to hand it off to DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai, 30 times for 140 yards or whatever, 150 yards, and, leave your quarterback in a much more advantageous position to be able to throw it away, be able to scramble, be able to, just kind of chuck it and say, you don't need to fire these balls downfield. You can take care of it, because the Seattle just ran the clock down. They managed it. They just kind of leaned on that ground game to slow things down and not let the Patriots have many opportunities to climb back in this game. Comparatively, you saw Drake May trying to do too much, right? That his running game isn't working. They're kind of abandoning it after a little bit there, but they had a bunch of 3 and outs. They just didn't have a lot of plays to kind of get the running game established. And then he's forcing some balls downfield. He's holding onto the ball too long in the pocket and taking a couple sacks when he shouldn't. And then getting the ball stripped when he's taking those sacks, or trying to throw the ball as he's being hit. It pops up in the air and it goes a pick six the other way, right? Like, Drake May was just a little rattled and not super decisive and confident, and it just didn't feel like he always had answers to the test. I mean, we talk about that phrase a lot with Ben Johnson, where it's like, he always has answers for Caleb Williams. Blitz is coming, here's where you can go with it. They drop 8 coverage, here's where you can go with it. Like, they try to build these things in, and it doesn't mean it's always there and it's always perfect, but you trust that when Caleb has to break the rules, he can do something great with it, but you don't want to ask him to break the rules all that often. And it felt like in this game, the Patriots kept having to ask Drake May to break the rules, and also he couldn't do much when he did break the rules. And man, if they could have run the ball the way Seattle did and not ask Drake May to try and force some of those balls downfield or try and escape and make a play when it just wasn't there, like you could see him being the young quarterback who I don't want to say the game was too big for him, because I don't think that's a fair assessment, because his offensive line wasn't helping him. The blitz pickup wasn't helping. I think play calling was a big factor there, just in terms of they couldn't pick up the blitz. They couldn't have answers for the blitz for him. There weren't always hot routes to go to. They weren't always passing off blocks properly up front. Like I think Seattle outcoached New England in quite a few aspects of this game. And then it doesn't help that Drake May doesn't have quite the weapons that Sam Darnold did. Darnold could dump it off to Cooper Kupp or Jackson Smith and Jigba or Rashid Shaheed. I know JSN left with the injury and came back, but like they have receivers for him to get to. And in New England, like Mac Hollins is fine, and we know what Stephon Diggs is capable of, but they just didn't really have like that go-to player that, where was their difference maker when they absolutely needed to make a play? Like the Bears have seen that in Colston Loveland, and at times in Luther Burden, at times in Rome Odunze, at times in DJ Moore, right? Like that's going to be a big factor here, so that your quarterback doesn't have to always make the big hero play, but sometimes you can throw it to Luther Burden 3 yards past the line of scrimmage. He can make a guy miss and pick up 12 yards. Like that stuff is super valuable, and it's something we saw the Seahawks benefit from quite a bit more. And the last thing that the Seahawks really benefited from that we should keep in the back of our minds this offseason was on special teams, where I don't want to say they dominated New England on special teams, but like it was just so flawless execution, right? They have one of the best punters in the league in Dickinson, or is it Dixon or Dickinson? I always add an extra couple letters in there, but like who could consistently pin the Patriots back inside the 10, inside the 5, and these long fields for New England where they just couldn't consistently string together long enough drives because your defense isn't allowing big plays and you're making the other team try to go 90 yards down the field with no big plays. It's really, really hard to do. And their kicker hits 5 for 5 on field goals, and none of them were particularly tough. 41 yards, 39 yards, 33 yards, 26 yards. But still, like having a kicker that you can consistently trust kick in and kick out. Like Santos isn't always that. And Torrey Taylor certainly isn't the punter that Michael Dixon, I think it's Dixon, I don't think it's Dickinson, is. And like their ability to just have solid special teams constantly, no long returns. I guess the Patriots had a couple of decent returns, I guess, but like good coverage, no muff kicks, no blocked kicks. I guess they got a little close on a Dickinson one here. There, Dixon. I always can mess that up. But like, man, that was just such a subtle hidden yardage thing for Seattle in this game. Just like special teams was on point. The punts were all where they needed to be. The field goals were all where they needed to be. And they forced New England to punt over and over again. New England punted 8 times in this game. Seattle punted 7. They both punted a lot. And like there weren't mistakes there. It wasn't that the big special teams play won them the game, the big kick return touchdown or the big blocked kick or whatever. Like they didn't need special teams to be above and beyond game changers, but just like, man, that's so solid. And when you can lean on a punter like that you just know is going to make life hard on the other team, like, is that the difference between the winning and losing the game for Seattle? No. Like, if they had Torrey Taylor and Cairo Santos as their kicker and punter, Seattle still wins this game. But boy, it just gives you that much more breathing room and peace of mind with that group. So, like, I've talked about it already on this podcast, but like, give me some punter competition. Give me some kicker competition. Doesn't have to be another high draft pick or a big free agent signing, but just somebody who's more than just a camp body, like someone who will apply some real pressure to Torrey Taylor, some real pressure to Cairo Santos, just so they don't feel like their jobs are super, super safe, that there's a Jake Moody breathing down their neck if they're going to mess up more than you can allow. So that's just the last little thing that like I think special teams mattered quite a bit in this game and was somewhat of a weapon for Seattle because their offense sputtered out a lot. I mean, there was 4 field goals for the first 3 quarters. That was the only scoring in this game. But it made it so Mike McDonald and Mike Vrabel, they didn't have to be Ben Johnson aggressive on 4th down every time because they just kind of knew that, hey, when I punt, I'm going to get a good punt here and can play the field position game. Or if I'm going to settle for the field goal here, I know it's going to be automatic inside of 45 yards from these guys. Santos has shown you that ability, and Torrey Taylor has shown you that ability. Just neither one of them does it consistently enough. And so let's get some competition in there to push them to be consistent enough. But we saw, whether it was the Bears against the Rams and throughout the season against the 49ers and some of the other games, Chicago is not that far from where these two Super Bowl teams were. Of course, they didn't get the job done against the Rams. They might not have beaten the Seahawks had they beaten the Rams. But if they had gotten to the Super Bowl, if they had been good enough to beat the Rams and the Seahawks, they certainly would have been good enough to beat the Patriots had they got there. You can really feel like this team is building something. I'm not here to say like, oh, we should act like the Bears are as good as the Super Bowl champion Seahawks. No, I just think we can acknowledge that they're in real proximity here and closer to this than they've been in a long time. So it's such a pivotal offseason for Ryan Poles to nail the upgrades we talked about, to get the pass rush closer to what we saw from Seattle, to get the safeties closer to what we were seeing from Seattle, and then for the offense to kind of just stick with what they're doing and just get better at it. I mean, I think they had the same approach. They just couldn't execute it as well. But another year of continuity in Ben Johnson's offense, and you can really start to get there. When the Bears start making these offseason changes, you can be sure we'll break it down for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Don't forget to check out that Everydayers Club, LockedOnBears.supercast.com if you want the ad-free audio feed and the Locked On Bears group chat. Otherwise, you can keep tuning in the same way you always do. We're free and available on all platforms, and we'll always make sure that when you tune into Locked On Bears, you're going to get another opportunity to bear down.